Yes, Madam President, thank you very much. I simply wanted to rise in solidarity of the victims of a deadly gas explosion that occurred in Mexico City on Thursday, January 29th. The explosion occurred at the maternity hospital in Coajimalpa after a hose burst on a truck supplying gas to the building. And of course, some people may not know that sometimes pipes explode, and in this case, in some parts of Mexico where they don't have pipe servicing buildings, they actually transport gas in large cylinders. And in this case, there was a mishap with one of the cylinders. The explosion left approximately 3 dead, 72 injured, and 30% of the building in rubble. As the first responders tried to evacuate the building, the most difficult task was to rescue the babies trapped inside the building and inside the debris. In fact, many of the newborns were saved because their mothers carried them out of the building and covered them up. This horrific incident demonstrates how people come together in difficult times, and more importantly, it highlights preventative measures that need to be taken anywhere in the world that can prevent incidents like this from happening. Many countries do not count on the infrastructure to adequately safeguard with the delivery of gas. As the Chair of Energy and Utilities, it is extremely important to highlight accidents like Thursday's to raise awareness amongst government officials about safety preventative measures and infrastructure investments looking forward. I invite you to join me today in adjourning in the memory of the victims of this very tragic explosion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Hueso. Senator Leno, for what purpose do you rise?
For adjourn in memory. Adjourn in memory.
Senator Leno, we're going to work our way through the file,
okay,
and I'll create opportunity for adjourn in memory toward the end of our floor session. I apologize for any confusion. Seeing no additional mics raised, we'll proceed to messages from the governor. They'll be deemed read. Messages from the Assembly will also be deemed read. Reports of committee will be deemed read and amendments adopted. Moving on to motions, resolutions, and notices. Seeing no mics, introductions, and first reading of bills, Mr. Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 152, 153, 154, 155, 156, and Senate Bill 157.
Thank you very much. They'll be deemed read. Moving on to consideration of the daily file. Governor's appointments, items number 1. Mr. President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, we have before us file item number 1, an appointment, 2 appointments from the governor. That's Catherine Pettibone and Randy M. Short. Both individuals' appointments were considered at the January 21st Rules Committee hearing. It passed with unanimous support in a bipartisan manner. Both Ms. Pettibone as well as Mr. Short are lifelong water sport enthusiasts. Ms. Pettibone sells competitively, and Mr. Short has managed marinas on lakes as well as rivers, and both have extensive knowledge on the issues of waterways and the needs of boaters. Madam President, as well as colleagues, I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Hueso.
I just want to rise and offer my support to these 2 individuals. In particular, I just wanted to highlight the achievements of Catherine Pettibone. She is one of the few people in the world that have actually raced around the world twice, and currently she is a candidate to compete. Well, she's currently competing to want to compete in the Olympics in sailing. So I think she brings a lot of honor to our state in pursuing athletics at that level, and she is somebody with a very rare amount of experience and expertise on the subject. So we're very pleased to have her want to step up and serve her state. And I want to thank them both.
Thank you very much. Senator Anderson.
In light of all the discussion earlier about Title IX, I too rise to share a kind word about Catherine Pettibone. Catherine Pettibone, if you Google that, you'll find that she has a keen legal mind. If you Google Katie Pettibone, you'll find page after page after page going from the Olympics to America's Cup. She is a world-class sailor. She has sailed all over the world in almost every competition possible. But I think the part that's most striking about her is her philanthropic work helping women learn to come into their own. She teaches women in the Middle East who have never known any leadership position in their life to sail and to command a sailboat. She puts her life at risk by doing that, but that's her commitment to the women around her, trying to provide a better future. I know of no finer sailor than Catherine Pettibone, and I urge an aye vote.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pro Tem, do you choose to close or? Fine. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Bates. Aye. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. Aye. Block. Aye. Canella. Aye. De Leon. Aye. Fuller. Aye. Gaines. Aye. Galgiani. Aye. Hall. Aye. Hancock. Aye. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hill. Aye. Weso. Aye. Huff. Aye. Jackson. Aye. Latta. Aye. Leno. Aye. Leyva. Aye. Liu. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mendoza. Aye. Mitchell. Aye. Monning. Aye. Morrell. Aye. Wynn. Aye. Nilsson. Aye. Pan. Aye. Pavley. Aye. Roth. Aye. Stone. Aye. Vidak. Aye. Wykowski. Aye. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. The appointments are confirmed. Ayes 37, no 0. Colleagues, we'll move now to Senate third reading, file item number 3, SR number 7. Senator Lara. Secretary, please read.
Senate Resolution 7 by Senator Latta relative to Mexico and human rights.
Senator Lara.
Thank you, Madam President and colleagues. By now you have heard the devastating atrocity that occurred in Ayotzinapa, Mexico in September, where 43 students were missing after exercising their human right of free speech. Last week, these students were officially declared dead by Mexico's Attorney General. It was determined that they were abducted, killed, burned, and thrown into the San Juan River. This unbelievable act of violence is shocking and should never happen to anyone standing for their beliefs. Today marks the first day of the United Nations Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. It will examine human rights violations and injustices globally, and will hear the case of the 43 students that are missing in Mexico. Mexico's National Human Rights Commission will report today to the UN that they have a serious problem with disappearances and lack of comprehensive national list of those missing to effectively deal with this ever-growing problem. This gross human rights violations caused an international uproar, and I introduced Senate Resolution 7 to call for further investigation of these human rights and injustices. I bring SR 7 to the floor on the heels of the UN's convening in Geneva today. This hearing is the hope the families of the students have been waiting for, and I urge the California legislature to stand in solidarity for their call for justice and in defense of freedom of speech. As the English Parliament has already passed a resolution recognizing the students' disappearance as a human rights issue, the California legislature must demonstrate leadership in supporting this call for justice. This resolution acknowledges the disappearance and the deaths of the missing college students from Mexico is a gross human rights violation and encourages the United Nations to further investigate the discovery of the actual bodies. Colleagues, I respectfully ask for your aye vote in recognition of the freedom of speech and against inhumane treatment of our brothers and sisters worldwide.
Thank you. Senator Hueso.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also wanted to rise on this very important matter. First of all, I think it's very important that we address this issue and that we get behind an organized statement because I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction in our own country about the violence that's happening not only in Mexico but other parts of the world. And Mexico is one of those countries that has become a pipeline for drugs into our country, and it's caused a lot of insecurity and violence. And the drug trade is something that is causing the loss of a lot of lives, not only in Mexico but throughout the world, especially in our country. This is an extension of what's happening in our country, and we need to recognize that when we make these statements. In this instance, there is an investigation going on. I have taken time to really look into this matter and see what the government is doing. And this resolution urges the government to support further dialogue between the international community, including the United States and human rights organizations, on human rights reforms. And that's something that clearly needs to be stated, but that's something that the government is doing. They're also working with Austria to employ the best technologies available to ensure that the student remains are identified. I think they're making every effort to identify the students' remains so they can give them a proper burial. There's no doubt that Mexico is being torn apart, and as long as they're being torn apart, it's going to create an imbalance in the Americas that eventually winds up at our doorstep. So it's important that we work with our colleagues in Mexico to sort this issue out. Without casting accusations, there is no evidence yet that the government was involved in this. This right now is pointing toward the cartels, but there's an ongoing investigation that's involving everybody, and I hope that they also look within the government organizations and the military and any entity that could have had a say in this, that they be held accountable, that they be brought to justice, and that the world itself knows what occurred here and that there's justice for all. So I want to thank the author for having the courage to bring this forward, and we have a lot of work to do between our respective countries.
Thank you. Senator Nguyen.
Thank you. I first want to also thank Senator Laura for bringing this forward. Having come from a country of communism, right now in Vietnam, there are human rights violations all over the world, and this is the right thing to do. We should, as a legislative body, stand against human rights violations and prosecution. Freedom of speech and freedom of democracy is what our country is the beacon of. And we should stand together and in support of these families. This horrific event is something that should not have happened to anybody in this world. And so I, again, thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you very much. Senator Lara, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam President. I thank my colleagues for rising in support of this important resolution. Well, it is undeniable that atrocities similar to this occur regularly throughout the world and have occurred in our own country. We must not remain complacent when it's happening at our doorstep, especially when many of us share not only just economic ties, but cultural ties with Mexico. It is important that we join the international community in calling for just, fair treatment for everyone, particularly as they exercise their freedom of speech. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, this resolution is eligible for unanimous roll call. If there is any opposition, please indicate. Seeing none, we'll apply the unanimous roll call. Ayes 37, no 0. The resolution passes. Again, consideration of daily file. Moving on to item number 8, SCR 10. Senator Huff, are you prepared to present? Pass on file. At this point, colleagues, we'll return to motions and resolutions. Also, those who wish to adjourn in memory. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, the San Francisco Bay Area and nation lost a real giant of a human being last Friday upon the death of Dr. Carl Gerasi, who passed away at the age of 91. He's, of course, best known as the father of the pill. He was among the chemists who helped successfully bring forward the first oral contraceptive pill. But beyond being a chemist, he was also a lecturer, a professor, a playwright, a poet, a novelist, a cattle rancher, a philanthropist, and a renowned art collector. He first came to this country when he was 14 in 1939, when his mother and he were escaping Austria, his homeland, upon Nazi occupation. He wrote a letter to Eleanor Roosevelt when he arrived in this country, asking for help with his higher education. As a brilliant high school student, he allowed her to help him get a college scholarship. He was, of course, very shaken by the suicidal death of his daughter, Pamela, in 1979, and he turned half of his cattle ranch into an artist colony, which provided housing and studios for performing artists, for choreographers, musicians, for playwrights, for other writers. He is survived by his son, Dale Gerasi, a stepdaughter, Leah Middlebrook, and a grandson, Alexander Gerasi. And I ask you in joining me as we send our concern and condolences to his surviving family members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Nielsen?
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, it is with heavy heart, but with gracious thanks, that I'd ask that we adjourn today in the memory of Mr. Peter Schaffner, a quiet legend around here. We know that it is not all of us, these all-important senators and assembly people, that make the biggest difference. It's all those folks that work in the background that ensure we're capable of doing our job. Peter Schaffner was such a person. Started his career working in the legislative analyst's office. 20 years he worked there, and I got to listen to Peter many, many times appearing before the Senate. After that, he worked in the state treasurer's office as assistant treasurer. And then he was executive director, the Debt Investment Advisory Commission, as a part of the treasurer's office. In 1999, the Assembly was lucky enough to get him to come over and head the Republican fiscal staff. And over those years, he made his mark on government and on the budget. Very few could ever claim to have the knowledge of the intricacies, the interrelationships, and the importance of the California state budget. And as we know, there are always difficult bornings of our budget and working it through the process. Peter was a master at coming up with ideas that could break the deadlock, that could define pathways to agreement amongst very divergent points of view. He was a quiet man, but a powerful man. On occasion, we'd lock horns because he'd have a little different opinion of something than I, and I always loved when we did that because he was steeped in the Senate tradition of disagreeing with you very respectfully. I reciprocated in kind, but those occasions were very few. He had a long history of helping us deal with things that would get our budget permanently under control. And I would consider the Rainy Day Fund, Proposition 2, a testimony to Peter's legacy, because he worked on the ideas embodied in that proposition passed by the voters so overwhelmingly, and by this legislature too, I'll note. He worked hard over the years to get those things into our budget process. He's survived by his wife, Sandy, a wonderful 38-year marriage. Willem and Samantha, Willem, his son. Sarah, daughter. He's a grandson. Jacob Peter. How very special that Peter's name will live on in the name of his grandson. Many other family members grieve his loss. This legislature lost someone very important when he retired. He went on to found another consulting business and continued to be gainfully employed in that effort, working on behalf of his family till the very end. Pass peacefully. We pray God will have a house for him in his house of many mansions. We here on earth will remember him. And whenever I think of Proposition 2, I'll think of Peter Schaafsma. He was a great servant of the people of California and a great credit to the California State Legislature. I ask that we adjourn in Peter Schaafsma's memory. And if I may acknowledge his staff back here, stand up, folks. These are the wonderful people that spent those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours helping and working under his direction. God love you too. And his wife, his son, Willem, Sarah. Peter Schaafsma, folks.
Thank you very much, Senator Nielsen. Senator Gaines.
If I could, just for a moment, I also wanted to recognize Peter. I had the opportunity to work with him in the Assembly in '06 when I was elected. The first piece of legislation that I proposed was a revision of the GAN limit on the growth of government, trying to control the growth of government based on inflation and population growth. And Peter Schaafsma really wrote that bill for me. And he was just a great wealth of knowledge within the caucus, and he was really relied on quite a bit. And so just want to recognize him and thank the family for the great contribution that he made to the Assembly Republican Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator De Leon.
Thank you, Madam President. I also, too, want to rise and add a Democratic voice, you know, with regards to the tragic loss of Peter Schaafsma. I had an opportunity to work with Peter when I was the chair of the Appropriations Committee on the Assembly side. And when we move forward our analysis, obviously it's a representation of Democratic priorities, Republican priorities. And I always found Peter to be an incredible gentleman, someone who was above the fray, who represented his Republican caucus very well, who represented the fiscal perspective and priorities of the Assembly Republican Caucus very well, and I harbored a tremendous amount of respect for him. Obviously, during that tenure, Senator Nielsen was at one time my vice chair of the Fiscal Committee on Appropriations. And when I always viewed Peter in this hyper-partisan world that we live in, unfortunately, especially under this dome, there was something about Peter that spoke something above the fray of the normal hyper-partisan body politic that we all, pertain to. And he was always a fresher breath air. He was someone who I could always engage with, and I trusted him. I trusted him. And trust is a very important commodity in the space that we're in today. As the chief Republican fiscal consultant on the Assembly Appropriations Committee, I trusted him. And when he gave me an answer, I took it with me to the bank. And he was always true to his word. So I want to also rise and acknowledge and give my perspective working with Peter as the former chair of the Appropriations Committee, and may he rest in peace. And I want to thank his family for contributing him to this legislative family of Democrats and Republicans together.
Thank you, sir. To the family of our Senate colleague, please accept our collective condolences. Will members please make sure you provide the desk with the names for them to be entered into the record. Seeing no additional mics raised, and if there's no other business, Senator De Leon, the desk is clear.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I hope you have a wonderful and productive next few days. We will see each other on this floor Thursday at 9 a.m. Thank you.
The Senate will be in recess until 3:30, at which time the adjournment motion will be made. We will reconvene Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Again, the reception in honor of Chief Sergeant at Arms Debbie Manning is currently taking place in room 211.